At a quiet farmer's market, a black army veteran was told to go back to the jungle. Instead of yelling, he reached into his bag and pulled out something that left everyone, including his attacker, speechless. You ever see a moment that splits a place in two? Not because of violence, not because of chaos, but because of a sentence? It was a Saturday morning in Knoxville, Tennessee, early June. Not yet hot, but the sun was already laying its claim on the blacktop. The Westover Community Market had that usual rhythm, kids running with sticky fingers, older folks sipping sweet tea in collapsible chairs, and gospel music playing soft from a booth with homemade candles. Eldon Trufant, 68 years old, moved through the market like he had nowhere urgent to be. His navy windbreaker caught the light. On the left side, 3 stitched patches. One said Army Medic, another Operation Desert Storm, and beneath that, Semper Gumby, a soldier's inside joke for always staying flexible. He didn't wear it to impress. He wore it because it was part of him. Eldon wasn't flashy. He kept to himself mostly, always polite, always calm. He had a habit of helping people, not in a loud way, but the kind of help that mattered. That morning, it was a young woman struggling to lift her stroller over a curb. She looked no older than 25, juggling a diaper bag and a fussy toddler. "Let me help with that," Eldon said. She looked surprised, but grateful. "Thank you, sir." He grabbed the handle, lifted the stroller gently over the concrete lip, and gave her a soft, "Take care now." That's when his shoulder lightly brushed the woman standing behind him in line for the biscuit cart. Her name was Marla Pencomb, and she turned like she'd been hit. "Excuse me," she snapped, stepping back like Eldon had shoved her. She was in her early 50s, with sharp features and the kind of haircut that costs more than a used car tire. Her lips curled. Eldon raised both hands slightly. "Didn't mean to crowd you, Mom." Marla didn't let it go. She looked him up and down, eyes flicking to his jacket, then his face. "People like you ought to go back to the jungle," she said, her voice rising just enough to cut through the hum of conversation. The baby in the stroller stopped fussing. A man at the lemonade stand lowered his cup. Someone muttered, "Did she just say that?" Eldon didn't blink. He didn't shift. He just looked at her like he was trying to figure out what kind of pain she had to carry, to spit out something like that to a stranger. "I served 20 years in uniform," he said calmly. "Didn't care what color the soldier next to me was, just whether he could run and carry a stretcher. I stitched up boys from Alabama and Brooklyn, black, white, and everything in between. Some made it, some didn't, but we didn't ask about bloodlines. We just stopped the bleeding." Marla scoffed. "Yeah? And now you're playing hero at a farmer's market." Someone near the honey booth whispered, "What is wrong with her?" The young mother was still standing nearby, wide-eyed. "I think you should apologize," she said quietly. Marla shot her a glare. "Why don't you worry about your own kid?" That's when the mood began to turn. The crowd wasn't loud, but there was movement. Subtle, tense. A few folks pulled out their phones, not to film Eldon, but to record her. Eldon didn't yell. He didn't argue. He took a breath, reached slowly into the canvas satchel he carried over his shoulder, faded green, the kind they don't make anymore. He pulled out a small plastic sleeve. Inside, a letter, folded in thirds, laminated. He held it up, not like a trophy, but like something sacred. "I keep this to remind myself why I kept going, even when I wanted to quit," he said. "Written by a young man I carried on my back out of a burning Humvee in Fallujah. He was 21, from Idaho. His name was Brendan Keller. Still sends me a card every Veterans Day. Now he's a paramedic up the road in Maryville." The square was still. No one was talking. Marla, for the first time, didn't seem to know what to say. Eldon looked at her, not with hate, but with something quieter, sadder. "You don't have to respect me, but you don't get to erase me." But even then, no one quite knew what would happen next. At first, there wasn't a single word, no pushback, no shouting, no one rushing in to defend Marla, just a hard, heavy silence that stretched across the Westover market like an iron sheet. You could hear the flap of the booth tents, the creak of a rocking chair someone had abandoned. Even the baby in the stroller didn't make a sound. Eldon stood in the center of it all, the laminated letter still in his hand. His fingers didn't shake. His expression hadn't changed. But you could tell. He didn't like the attention. He hadn't asked for it. Marla looked around. She was expecting someone, anyone, to agree with her, to nod along, maybe laugh it off. But all she saw were eyes. On her. Waiting. Watching. A teenage boy near the corn stand muttered, "That's messed up." His mum gave him a sideways glance but didn't disagree. Marla stiffened. Her mouth opened, then closed. She tugged at her purse strap, and for a moment it looked like she might double down. "I didn't mean it like that," she mumbled, loud enough to be heard. Eldon didn't move. The young mother with the stroller, her name was Jasmine Ellery, took a small step forward. "What exactly did you mean then?" The crowd shifted again. Jasmine wasn't angry, her voice wasn't sharp, but there was steel in it, and Marla knew it. "I just don't like being shoved," Marla snapped. "That's all. You were barely touched," someone else said. It was an older man in cargo shorts and a Veterans for Peace cap. "You just wanted to say something ugly." "And you did." Marla's face flushed. She turned toward Eldon. "I'm not going to be painted as some villain," she said, but her voice had lost its bite. "You don't have to be painted," Eldon replied. "You opened your mouth. You painted yourself." Another pause. That's when someone started clapping. Just one person. A woman holding a crate of strawberries. The sound echoed in the stillness. A second person joined, then a third. And suddenly the market wasn't quiet anymore. The applause wasn't explosive. It wasn't performative. It was slow, real, steady. Some clapped because they respected Eldon. Others clapped because they knew they'd stayed silent too long. Marla stepped back. "You people are pathetic," she muttered. "You said what you said," Jasmine replied. "Now you're just embarrassed we all heard it." Marla turned, heels clicking fast on the pavement as she marched away from the crowd. Eldon let out a small breath, lowered the letter, and slipped it back into his bag like he was tucking away a memory. Not for display, just for safekeeping. Someone offered him a bottle of water. He took it, gave a quiet, "Thank you." Jasmine looked at him, her eyes a little glassy. "You okay?" Eldon nodded once. "I'm fine." "Seen worse." "You handled that with, I don't know, grace," she said. He gave a half smile. "You live long enough, you learn what's worth shouting about and what ain't." They stood there for a moment. Then Jasmine turned to check on her toddler, and Eldon walked back toward the tomato stand, like he'd never left it. Like he just needed to finish his morning errands. But even though the moment had passed, the weight of it hadn't. People kept looking over. Whispers started. Some pulled out their phones to post about it. Not to brag, but because they couldn't quite believe what they'd witnessed. A man had been told to go back to the jungle, and he'd responded not with anger, but with truth. And somehow that hurt more. But Eldon's story was just getting started, because what happened at the market didn't stay at the market. By the time Eldon got home that afternoon, his wife Lorraine was already setting out lunch. Grilled chicken, cornbread, and sliced cucumbers from the garden. Their little house on Whittier Avenue, not far from the river, was shaded by 2 stubborn old sycamores that had survived 3 windstorms and a small kitchen fire. "You were out longer than usual," Lorraine said, glancing up from the pitcher of iced tea. Eldon placed the paper bag of tomatoes on the counter. "Ran into a situation at the market." She raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Not yet. He washed his hands, sat down, and started eating like it was any other Saturday. But Lorraine knew him too well. After 43 years of marriage, you notice the pauses, the slight tilt in the shoulders, the way someone chews when they're still thinking about something they didn't say. "You want to talk about it?" she asked gently. So he did. Not every detail. Not at first. Just enough for her to understand what happened. Enough to see the quiet insult, the heavy silence, and the letter, the one from Brendan Keller, that had somehow spoken louder than his voice ever could. Lorraine listened without interruption. She didn't gasp, didn't curse. When he finished, she sat back and crossed her arms. "She really said that, in front of all those people?" Eldon nodded. "Clear as day." "And you pulled out the letter?" Felt like the right time. Lorraine looked at him for a long moment. It always rattles me when you talk about that day. Eldon rubbed the side of his neck. I think about it more than I let on. He didn't have to explain. She remembered the phone call, the days after, the photo of him lying in a hospital bed in Germany with burns up his left arm. And then, 6 months later, the envelope with shaky handwriting that had shown up just before Thanksgiving. Brendan Keller's words were short, but they hit hard. You gave me another chance at life, Sergeant Trufant. I hope I do something good with it. That one sentence was why Eldon had kept the letter laminated, carried it with him ever since. Not for pride, but to remind himself that sometimes, in the middle of chaos, something right can still happen. But now that letter was in other people's phones. Someone had recorded the whole scene at the market. Eldon didn't know it until Sunday morning, when Lorraine opened her iPad and gasped. Eldon! There he was, still and steady, on someone's TikTok feed, over 300,000 views in less than 12 hours. The video showed everything, Marla's comment, Eldon's calm reply, and the part where he raised the letter like it was a shield made of truth. Lorraine's hand covered her mouth. They're calling you Knoxville's quiet hero, Eldon scoffed. I'm not interested in being anyone's headline. But it was already too late. Local news stations picked it up next. Then regional ones. A radio host on WVRX talked about it between weather updates and country music breaks. Callers flooded the lines, some shocked, others emotional. A woman from Cookville called in crying, saying her father had served in Desert Storm too, and would have done the same thing. A man from Johnson City said, "That guy didn't just carry soldiers, he carried all of us in that moment." By Monday morning, Eldon's voicemail was full. Even Brendan Keller reached out. It came as a text first, then a call. His voice was a little deeper now, older, more grounded. But it was still him. I saw the video, Brendan said. Can't believe you still carry that letter around. Saved my life once. Eldon said. Felt like it might again. They both chuckled. But then Brendan got quiet. You made a lot of people stop and think. Including me. Eldon didn't say anything right away. He wasn't sure what to say. Then Brendan added, My daughter watched it and asked if she could meet you someday. That hit deeper than Marla's words ever could. But while Eldon was just trying to move forward, the town wasn't finished talking, and neither was Marla. If you'd asked around Knoxville before that weekend, Marla Pencomb wouldn't have stood out. She wasn't a public figure. She didn't run for office, didn't coach any youth teams, didn't write letters to the paper. She worked in real estate, mostly suburban listings out in the Bearden and West Hills neighborhoods, and kept a polished online presence. Facebook photos full of Sunday brunches and vacation smiles. Nothing messy, nothing too personal. But under the surface, there was always something a little tight about her. A clipped tone, a sideways glance. The kind of woman who'd correct your grammar before hearing your point. She'd been divorced for years, no kids, and rarely came to community events unless she was networking. That day at the Westover market, she'd come alone, wearing pearls and a floral blouse, like she was heading to a meeting, not picking out produce. After the video went viral, folks started digging. Old acquaintances came forward. A former co-worker at the realty office said she once called a black family too flashy for the neighborhood. A waiter at a downtown restaurant remembered her snapping her fingers and calling him boy when he didn't bring her extra napkins fast enough. Nothing illegal, nothing that would make headlines on its own. But stacked together, it painted a picture. Marla didn't deny it. In fact, she didn't say anything at all for 3 days. Then on Wednesday morning, she finally made a statement, posted not on her main Facebook page, but in the Knoxville Locals community group. I'd like to apologize to anyone who misunderstood my words. I was startled and reacted poorly. That was not my intention. I respect all veterans and regret that my words have been taken out of context. Please respect my privacy moving forward. That was it. No mention of Eldon. No acknowledgement of the specific words she'd used. No real apology. The comments exploded. She didn't say sorry. She said, misunderstood. Big difference. Lady, we all heard you. No one misunderstood anything. If that's how you apologize, I'd hate to see how you really feel. But a few people jumped in to defend her. She was probably overwhelmed. Everyone makes mistakes. People are too sensitive these days. Eldon didn't comment. He didn't respond publicly. He didn't need to. But Jasmine Ellery did. She posted a short video from her front porch, her voice calm, her expression tired. I was there. I saw what happened. And the man she disrespected? He didn't call her names. He didn't shout. He just stood there with the kind of strength I hope my son grows up to have. That wasn't misunderstood. It was clear as glass. And if we pretend it wasn't, we're all just lying to make ourselves more comfortable. The video caught fire too. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about what Marla had said. It was about how people responded, and whether they'd let it pass like so many moments before it. The city felt it. Book clubs brought it up. Pastors mentioned it in sermons. Even the local library board discussed it at their next meeting after someone suggested inviting Eldon to speak at a veterans panel. But not everyone was eager to talk. Marla's employer quietly removed her face from their website's homepage. No official statement, just a shift in visibility. Her neighbors stopped waving. A few stopped speaking altogether. She was still seen at the fresh market on Kingston Pike, but always alone, always looking over her shoulder, as if bracing for whispers she couldn't quite prove were happening. Some people felt bad for her, not because she'd been misunderstood, but because she had burned a bridge in full view of the city, and couldn't seem to grasp why it mattered so much. But while Marla's world began to shrink, Eldon's was slowly expanding in ways he never asked for. By the time Friday rolled around, Eldon had gone viral twice. The original video, the one caught by the strawberry vendor's niece, had crossed over 1 million views. But now, there were other angles. Someone else had recorded the interaction from across the booth aisle. Another clip showed the crowd clapping, wide shot, with Eldon in the center like the calmest man in a storm. He didn't watch any of them. He tried, once. Lorraine played one on her tablet after breakfast. 30 seconds in, he asked her to pause it. Not interested in watching myself exist, he said. But he couldn't ignore it either. Everywhere he went, someone stopped him. The guy at the hardware store gave him a discount on gardening gloves. A middle schooler at the bus stop asked for a selfie. The staff at Easttown Pharmacy wrote, "Thank you for your service," on his prescription bag in blue Sharpie. Even folks who didn't say anything just looked at him different, like they finally noticed him after years of walking right past. But Eldon hadn't changed. He still took out the trash on Mondays, still watered the azaleas before dusk, still brewed his coffee the same way, strong enough to strip paint. What had changed was the town. People were talking in places they hadn't before, grocery aisles, barber shops, church foyers, not shouting, just asking questions. Do you think she meant it? Why did it take a camera for people to care? Have you ever had something like that happen to you? Even folks who'd never spoken to Eldon were suddenly reflecting on moments they'd once ignored, things they'd laughed off or stayed quiet about. And then came the letters. Dozens of them. Mailed by strangers, some typed, some handwritten on loose-leaf paper or thank you cards with flowers on the front. One envelope had no return address, just the words, "From a white man who should have known better years ago." Lorraine read most of them out loud at night while Eldon sat beside her. One from a woman in Kentucky said, "My grandfather was in the army too. He never got thanked either." Another from a teen in Memphis. "You reminded me that quiet doesn't mean weak. I needed that." Still, not all the attention felt welcome. Eldon received a call from a reporter in Nashville asking if he'd do an interview for a morning segment. He declined. 2 churches invited him to speak at their services. He declined those too. Not out of bitterness, but because he didn't want to turn that moment at the market into a tour. He hadn't done anything heroic. He'd just answered hate with memory. That's all. "I don't need a microphone," he told Lorraine. "People heard me just fine without one," but the pressure didn't let up. On Sunday morning, Eldon walked into Franklin Street Diner, same place he'd eaten breakfast for years. The same waitress, Cheryl Grant, kind-eyed and quick with refills, poured his coffee like always. But this time, the whole place got quiet when he came in, not in a cold way, just watchful. "You okay with all this?" she asked as she dropped his plate of eggs. He shrugged. "It'll pass. You sure?" she said. "'Cause I think it's just getting started." And she wasn't wrong. Later that week, Knoxville Community College reached out through a friend of Lorraine's. They wanted Eldon to speak at a panel about dignity, service, and public discourse. "I'm not a speaker," he said. "You're a man who lived through something," Lorraine told him. "That's more than enough." He was still thinking it over when Brendan Keller texted again. "Let me know if you go. I'll drive down to hear you." That one message stuck in his mind. Brendan had turned his life around, became a paramedic, started a family. All because of one moment in Fallujah, and maybe a laminated letter that held more weight than years of small talk. But just as Eldon was trying to make peace with the attention, the town itself was growing restless and ready to take sides. Eldon never liked talking about Fallujah. He'd seen things there that didn't fit neatly into words. Heat that warped the air, sounds that clung to your chest long after the gunfire stopped, faces of young men too scared to speak and too brave to run. But after that morning at the market, those memories came back sharper. Not in nightmares, he hadn't had those in years, but in flashes. In the way the sun hit the pavement, the smell of diesel when a school bus passed, the way a stranger's tone could twist something small into something heavy. Lorraine found him standing in the garage one afternoon, just holding the old satchel that had once been part of his field kit. His fingers traced the worn strap like it still mattered. "You all right?" she asked. He looked up. "Been thinking. About what?" "About all the times I kept my mouth shut. Let folks talk. Let things slide. I always told myself I was keeping the peace. And now," he took a breath, "now I think I was just tired." She didn't push, just walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You weren't wrong to stay quiet back then," she said. "But you're not wrong to speak now." That stayed with him. Because the truth was, Eldon had been carrying more than just that thank you letter. He carried the quiet moments people never saw, like when a commanding officer once called him boy in front of a group of younger medics, or when he was passed over for promotion 3 times, even with commendations and spotless records, or when he returned home from his final tour and a cab driver in Asheville refused to pick him up. None of those moments had gone viral. They didn't come with applause, but they'd left marks just the same. He didn't talk about them, not because he forgot, but because he didn't think anyone would care. But now, they did. At least some people did. Others? Not so much. At the diner, he overheard a man say, "I'm tired of hearing about that market drama. Why does everything gotta be about race?" Another said, "It's just a bunch of bleeding hearts blowing things out of proportion." Eldon didn't argue, didn't stand up, just took his coffee to go. But back at home, he told Lorraine, "They think I wanted attention." "They don't know you," she said. And she was right. The ones who really knew Eldon, guys from his old unit, folks he'd sat beside at town hall meetings, kids he'd driven to school as a substitute bus driver back in the 90s, they all saw it different. They remembered the man who showed up on time, helped without being asked, and kept his promises. One of them, a former neighbor named Harley Jimenez, even posted on Facebook, "When my wife had a seizure in our driveway back in '03, Eldon was the first one there. Beat the ambulance, didn't ask questions, just acted. I'll never forget it. Y'all can argue politics, but don't act like this man's anything but solid." That post got shared hundreds of times. And slowly, it started shifting something in town. People who hadn't spoken up before now began sharing their own stories. Little things. The time Eldon fixed a flat tire in the rain for a stranded mom. The time he sat next to a veteran with PTSD who couldn't face a crowd alone. The time he volunteered at the high school health fair even after retiring. All of that started to matter. And maybe, just maybe, it made folks look at themselves a little different. But just as the town began to reckon with its silence, not everyone was ready to sit with that discomfort, and some were about to push back harder. It didn't take long for the story to stop being about just one man and one insult. By the second week, Knoxville had turned into a patchwork of reactions, some loud, some subtle, and some boiling under the surface. It wasn't just what Marla had said, or even how Eldon responded. It was what it represented, what it revealed. At Jefferson High School, a group of students organized a lunch discussion in the library titled Words That Won't. The room filled faster than anyone expected. Juniors, seniors, even a few teachers. Kids who didn't usually talk to each other shared stories about moments they'd been talked down to, ignored, or made to feel small. One girl, Zaria Chen, told the room about the time her history teacher skipped over slavery in a lecture, calling it too controversial. A boy named Miles Quinton, half black and half Korean, talked about the sideways jokes people made when he wore his ROTC uniform. Eldon's name came up more than once. He didn't even raise his voice, Zaria said. That's what made it hit harder. Across town, a local pastor, Reverend Paul Langley, opened his Sunday sermon with a question. When's the last time you saw someone choose dignity over destruction? He didn't mention Eldon by name, but everyone in the pews knew who he meant. Not every reaction was supportive. A morning radio host on 95.3, the anchor, a man who prided himself on telling it like it is, mocked the whole thing on air. Look, if we're cancelling every lady who says something out of pocket at a farmer's market, we're going to be out of grandmas. He chuckled. It's just words, people. Calm down. That clip spread too. Some people agreed with him, loudly, but others called the station demanding he apologize. The city was split. Not cleanly, not violently, but noticeably. Some folks who'd been nodding quietly for years were now forced to pick a side. Was it okay to say someone ought to go back to the jungle? If you didn't mean it like that, was it just frustration? A slip? Or was it a reflection of something deeper? Eldon stayed out of it. He didn't comment on the radio drama, didn't show up to the rallies forming in front of City Hall. One side held signs that read, "Dignity is power." The other had one that said, "No free speech, no freedom." Lorraine kept the TV off, but Jasmine Ellery was right in the middle of it. She'd become something of a spokesperson, not by choice, but because her voice carried weight after her porch video. She started fielding emails, DMs, even invites to speak on local podcasts. She agreed to one. It was hosted by a Knoxville college student named Riley Tran, who ran a show called Voices of the Valley. I wasn't trying to be brave, Jasmine said in the interview. I just couldn't pretend I didn't hear what I heard. And the fact that so many people are more upset about the attention than the insult, that tells me we've still got work to do. The podcast episode went viral in its own right. And that's when Marla reappeared. She didn't go on camera, didn't issue a press release, but she was spotted at a local HOA meeting where she told neighbors that she was being unfairly crucified by social media, and that she was considering legal action for defamation. The room was silent. Even people who had once defended her now looked uncomfortable. The truth was, Marla had shown people something they didn't want to admit. About their town, their circle, even their own quiet thoughts. But the difference now was people were finally talking about it. Some for the first time. And whether they liked it or not, Eldon had become a mirror. But what no one expected was where that mirror would be placed next. Inside the walls of a local high. Marla Pencom had spent most of her life knowing exactly how she was perceived. Refined, orderly, polite enough in public, but never afraid to speak her truth behind closed doors. She was used to being in control, but now the town she once moved through so comfortably had shifted under her heels. And she didn't like how it felt. By week 3, she could barely go to the post office without feeling eyes on her. She started using the self-checkout lane at the grocery store, wore oversized sunglasses even on cloudy days, and had cut her hair shorter, though people still recognized her. Her real estate clients dwindled. A few listings were pulled. Friends stopped returning calls. So she decided it was time to clear the air. The opportunity came through a local podcast called Conversations in Knox, run by a retired news anchor named Trevor Yates, who had a reputation for softball interviews and letting his guests talk themselves clean. Marla agreed, on one condition. No live stream. Pre-recorded only. When the episode dropped, the title was simple. Marla Pencom Responds. Trevor opened gently, as expected. We've all seen the clip, Marla, but we haven't heard from you. What was going through your mind in that moment? Marla let out a practiced sigh. It's been a difficult few weeks, Trevor. That moment was deeply misunderstood. I felt physically invaded. The man came too close, startled me, and I reacted poorly. I said something I regret. But I think the outrage has gone too far. Trevor nodded slowly, prompting more. I've received death threats. People screaming at me outside my home. I've lost clients. I'm not saying I didn't say something wrong, but I feel like I've been made into a villain for one bad moment. There it was again. The same message she'd posted in the Facebook group, now repackaged with a more sympathetic tone. At one point, Trevor asked her directly, "Do you believe what you said was racist?" Marla paused. Too long. I believe it was insensitive. I was upset, but I don't believe I'm a racist. I think people are too quick to label others without knowing their full story. That line didn't land the way she thought it would. Online, the reaction was swift. Screenshots of her quote flooded Twitter. Memes followed. One showed a bottle of bleach labeled insensitive, not racist. Another showed a scale titled Weight of Words, with her apology floating on one side and Eldon's laminated letter on the other. Even Trevor Yates, normally unshakable, was quietly roasted for letting her slide through the interview without challenge. At the Maple Oak Senior Center, where Eldon sometimes volunteered, folks passed around the audio with raised eyebrows. "She's still trying to dodge it," said Alberta Givens, who ran the front desk. "She thinks if she says it softly, it'll sound less nasty." Eldon hadn't listened to the full thing, but Lorraine did. When he came back from the pharmacy, she was standing in the kitchen, phone in hand, jaw tight. "She still doesn't get it," Lorraine said. "Still thinks she's the one who was attacked." Eldon set down his keys, slow. "Let her talk. Folks are listening now, they weren't before. But you didn't ask for any of this." "I didn't," he said. "But maybe it was supposed to land in my lap anyway." That night, Eldon sat out on the porch with a cup of decaf and watched the streetlights blink on. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked, a lawnmower revved. Life continued. But the weight of that interview lingered, not because he expected Marla to change, but because her words reminded him of how often people hide behind the language of discomfort. Insensitive. Misunderstood. Taken out of context. All polite disguises for something much uglier. Still, he didn't return fire. He wouldn't go on her level, wouldn't trade dignity for clicks. But he did accept one invitation he'd been avoiding. A high school principal named Cynthia Leung had called twice, asking if Eldon would come speak to the students. Not for an assembly, she said, but something quieter, more honest. A conversation in the gym with the senior class. Eldon had ignored it. Until now. He picked up the phone and dialed her number. "This Eldon Trufant," he said. "About that invitation. I think it's time." But what he didn't know was how much that room, those students, would end up teaching him. The gym at Knoxville Central High didn't look like a place where anything important happened. The bleachers creaked, the lights buzzed faintly. Someone had forgotten to dust the top row of banners hanging from the rafters. District champs from another decade, faded blue and gold. But that morning, something shifted in the air. Eldon stood near center court, not behind a podium, just holding the microphone loosely in one hand. He wasn't wearing his windbreaker, just a plain button-up shirt, dark jeans, and the same boots he'd worn since the late 90s. The front rows were packed with seniors. A few teachers lingered off to the side. Principal Cynthia Leung sat behind him on a folding chair, arms folded, eyes steady. He hadn't written a speech. That's not how he worked. He figured the truth would show up once he opened his mouth. And it did. "I've never spoken to a group like this before," he began. "Not in a gym, anyway. So if I say something sideways, y'all will forgive me." A few students chuckled nervously. He scanned the room, paused. "I'm here because a few weeks ago, a woman at a market told me I ought to go back to the jungle. And I responded with a story, not a fist." Now the room was still. "You ever get talked to like you don't belong? Like your face, your name, the way you walk, means you don't fit?" Several students nodded. "I've been there, but I'll tell you something. You don't always have to bark to be heard. And sometimes the loudest thing you can do is stay still and speak plain." He talked about his time in the army, about what it was like patching up people in the dirt while mortars screamed overhead, about sharing food with soldiers from different states, different languages, some of whom didn't make it home. He didn't get emotional. He just told the truth. Then he shifted. "You want to know the hardest thing I ever did?" he asked. A few heads tilted. It wasn't dragging someone out of a Humvee on fire. It was not answering hate with hate. That's hard. That takes muscle you don't get from lifting weights. He let the words hang. A student raised his hand. Eldon motioned for him to speak. "How do you know not to hit her back with something worse?" the boy asked. His voice cracked a little. Eldon took a breath. "Because I didn't want to walk away carrying her mess. I've carried enough." A girl in the second row, Jamari Green, raised her hand too. "Do you think she meant it? Like really meant it?" Eldon nodded. "Yes. But I also think some people say things not because they believe them deep down, but because they've never had to question them. They grew up thinking certain things were normal, and unless somebody puts a mirror in front of them, they never stop." Jamari thought about that, then whispered, "That's heavy." He nodded. "It is." Principal Leung stepped forward gently. "We've been talking a lot this semester about courage. Not the movie kind, real courage. Do you think silence can be courage?" Eldon rubbed his jaw for a moment. "Sometimes, but not always. Silence can also be fear, or guilt, or comfort." He looked around again. "What I want you all to understand is this. You don't gotta wait to be 68 to speak, right? You don't need a uniform to stand up. You just need to know who you are, and make sure the world hears that voice, not the one they try to assign you." By then, the gym felt different. Kids weren't fidgeting. Phones weren't out. They were there with him. At the end, he handed the mic back to Principal Leung and started to walk off. That's when one of the students, Jamari, stood and clapped. Then another. Then more. It wasn't the performative kind. It wasn't viral video energy. It was real. Respectful. Almost quiet in how sincere it was. Eldon gave them a nod of acknowledgement. No big speech, no dramatic wave. Just a small smile and the smallest sign that he'd felt it too. Later that afternoon, Principal Leung emailed Lorraine. "He didn't just talk to them. He changed something in that room. We're all still sitting with it." But even as others held on to his words, Eldon knew the moment wasn't his to keep. It was meant to pass through him and on to the next hand. 3 weeks after the market incident, the booths were back up at Westover. The peach truck had returned, the kettle corn stand was open again, and an older bluegrass duo was picking through a slow version of Tennessee Waltz under a pop-up tent. Eldon Trufant was there too, wearing his windbreaker, a grocery list folded in his front pocket, and a reusable canvas bag slung over one shoulder. Nothing flashy, just the same walk, the same calm steps. But the market felt different now. People still whispered, but not with suspicion, with reverence and respect. A vendor from Harriman waved and slipped a small jar of blackberry jam into his bag. No charge. A college kid asked if he could shake Eldon's hand. He did, but said, "You know I'm not famous, right? Don't need to be," the student replied. Across the street, Marla Pencombe stood by her car. She hadn't left town, though for a while it looked like she might. She hadn't sold a home in weeks, hadn't been seen at her usual brunch spots either. But there she was, watching the market from a distance, arms folded, sunglasses on. Eldon saw her. She didn't approach. She didn't wave. And he didn't go to her either. Not because he was bitter, not because he held a grudge, but because dignity isn't something you perform. It's something you hold. Quietly. Steadily. Especially when the easy thing would be to make a scene. Lorraine had asked him that morning if he wanted to avoid the market. "I'm not hiding from my own city," he said. "Let them see me. Let them remember." A group of teenagers walked by and one of them stopped. "You're the guy," she said. Eldon raised an eyebrow. "What guy?" "The one who didn't yell back. The one with the letter." He gave a small smile. "Guess that's me." She nodded. "My dad made me watch the video. He never talks about this stuff, but that one got him quiet for a whole night. Told me it made him think." Eldon thanked her. Told her to stay curious. That was all. He didn't need to be anyone's symbol. He didn't want statues or plaques or hashtags. He just wanted people to pause, to consider their words, to choose better next time. And they were. Slowly. That week, the City Council passed a motion to fund a new Veterans Health Initiative. Not because of pressure, because people suddenly realized how many Eldons were out there, quietly living among them. Knoxville Central High created a yearly Voices of Integrity talk for seniors. Eldon's talk would be the first archived. He didn't know that. Lorraine found out and told him with a proud little smile. Even Marla had changed, at least on the surface. She deleted her old posts, kept her head down. Some said she might move to Chattanooga. Others said she'd just wait it out until people forgot. Eldon didn't worry either way. He believed people could change, but not overnight, and not without discomfort. He believed in second chances, but not without accountability. What mattered more to him were the small signs. The boy at the corner store holding the door open without being told. The teacher who invited him to speak again, even if he wasn't sure he'd go. The older man at the VA clinic who leaned in close and whispered, "You did it right." As the sun began to lean west and the booths started packing up, Eldon walked toward his car, bag full of corn and beans and a fresh peach pie Lorraine had requested. He felt no heaviness, no heat from old words, just the warm hum of a town trying, really trying, to grow past its silence. Not because it was trendy, but because it was time. And maybe, just maybe, because one man chose not to match hate with hate, but with memory, clarity, and grace. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more true, powerful stories that reflect not just who we are, but who we could be. Let's keep talking. Let's keep thinking. Let's keep growing.